So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the September webinar of our series. I'm your host, Ian Craig. In my mind, we're living in an over-digitized society at the moment. Everything seems to have a digital link to it. But in the health and fitness space, there's been a very interesting trend over the last number of years of wearable devices. And I think some people use these devices without actually knowing what the information that's coming onto their phone or their watch is telling them. But if you can mindfully connect with the information from that device and what you're trying to do from a health or exercise or performance perspective, I think they can be incredibly useful. Heart rate variability is something I've been aware about for probably about 20 years, but it was very small scale at that point. Over the last 5-10 years, they've become very, very popular, and there's quite a few well-used devices now. So I've known about Firstbeat for quite a number of years, and I've interacted with Tiina a few times. So I find their information very professional, and therefore I've interacted with Tiina, asking her if she would kindly do a presentation for us. So I'm really glad that we can make this happen, Tiina. I'm really interested in what you have to say. And before I hand over to you, I'll just sort of talk about the format for tonight. We'll keep it as usual. Tiina will present for about 40 minutes or so. We're going to have a short ad break, and then we're going to go into a Q&A. Now, I'm going to start with a poll. You've got the chat box. I've got my usual 3 questions. Where are you in the world? We tend to be quite multi-international at the moment. What do you do? And what do you want to learn tonight? But I'm going to add a 4th question tonight, and that is, do you use some kind of heart rate variability method? And if so, what? And what have your experiences been, which I can share with Tiina later on. So with that, Tiina, thank you, and over to you.
Thank you, Ian, and welcome everyone, and greetings from Finland. I'm sitting in Jyväskylä in central Finland, and this is where I live, so I'm 2 hours behind you. It's 8 p.m. here, and when I introduce myself, I'll mention that I'm actually, this is not in my normal playbook. Usually by this time I'd be winding down and starting to slow down and get ready for bed, but sometimes for a good cause, it's worth being up at 8 p.m. and talking about important topics. So good to be here. And my topic, supercompensation of life, I'll try to clarify what I mean with that. And then I'll talk about heart rate variability from the point of view that how it can be utilized to optimize performance and learn more about our well-being. I'm not going to go into details about raw heart rate variability data or different kinds of heart rate variability indexes, but instead I'll introduce a method that utilizes that and then show some examples of what we can learn from that. So quickly, my introduction. I'm an exercise physiologist by training, and I have worked as a master trainer and specialist at Firstbeat Technologies for the last, I guess, 16 years or so. And I do a lot of presentations, webinars. I trained professional users in different countries in the use of our methods. And before Firstbeat, if I go way, way back into my younger years, decades ago, I was a Nordic skiing coach at the University of Alaska Anchorage. This picture here actually shows me as a ski racer in my 20s. I was a ski racer at first, and then I worked as a ski coach for a long time. And now for a long time, I worked with regular people, the corporate sector, wellness of working age people, but I draw a lot of learnings and principles from the world of sports, because I find that there are really big parallels between how performance works in sports and how it works in normal life as well. I've also done about a decade of different kind of academic research projects here in Finland. and to keep balance in my own life, sort of to make sure that I don't get too stressed out and I stay fit as I get older. I try to spend as much time outdoors as I can. So I really, outdoor exercise and outdoor activity is still my thing. I don't do it competitively or seriously anymore, but I love to get out on a hike or a kayak like I'm doing in the picture here. And in the wintertime, I always look forward to snow so I can go skiing. And like I said, sleep is something that it doesn't come naturally for me. I have to work to get good sleep, and I try to prioritize enough time and do the right things that support good sleep. So that's shortly it for about myself. And in the presentation, I'll first shortly introduce Firstbeat and our two solutions, Firstbeat Sports and Firstbeat Life. Just a quick preview of Firstbeat Sports, and then mainly I'll focus on Firstbeat Life. I'll talk a bit about heart rate variability, if it's a new concept for somebody, sort of what it is, and then mainly how we apply heart rate variability data to learn about things like stress and recovery or performance or exercise status, for example. I'll show several real-life examples from the data, from Firstbeat data. I'll explain them enough, so even if you don't have any background at all in Firstbeat, I'll make sure that it becomes clear. But the main point will be to show how different aspects of performance can be sort of highlighted by having some kind of reliable data about daily life. Then I'll talk about supercompensation and supercompensation of life, and I'll end with a few findings from we have a very large database, tens of thousands of measurements from regular people in their daily lives. So I'll share some interesting sort of population level trends or findings from that. And then, like Ian said, then I'm happy to take questions and hear comments at the end of the session. So Firstbeat is a company based in Finland. We were founded here about 20 years ago, and our headquarter office is still here in central Finland. And we are sort of a pioneer in utilizing heart rate variability in physiology-based coaching. We provide professional grade physiological data and analytics, both for wellness and for sports. In addition to that, Firstbeat methods or Firstbeat algorithms have been sold to over 50 million different consumer devices. So they have Firstbeat features inside of them. That part of our business was sold to Garmin a few years ago, so we are not directly associated with that anymore. But Firstbeat Wellness and Sports Solutions, we are an independent company here in Finland. Today, 23,000 athletes and over 1,000 elite sports teams utilize the Firstbeat Sports Solution that I mentioned, and over 1,000 health and wellness partner companies, so physiotherapists or wellness coaches or fitness coaches, occupational healthcare sector around the world are utilizing the Firstbeat Life method as part of whatever service they are providing to their clients. And all our methods have a lot of years of science and laboratory studies to validate our methods, and I'll share a little bit about that as well. The Firstbeat Sports, this is, if you want to learn more about that, you can go to our website and read more there. But just in short, the idea is to help the athlete or the coach of a team, for example, to work with confidence so they can improve the performance of all individual athletes in the team. So there is training insights, for example, live training monitoring, meaning that, for example, the manager or trainer of a football team or a hockey team, they can see the data from each individual athlete during the workout. They can see how each athlete's body is responding to the exertion of the training. And then if needed, they can instruct them to turn down the volume or the intensity, or to push it harder if it's supposed to be a hard workout. So they get automated reporting and numbers to show how each athlete is responding to training. In addition to that, and maybe some of our more sort of proprietary stuff that Firstbeat has developed is recovery insights. For example, the sports team has developed a quick recovery test. Coach might have their entire team lie down on the gym or the pitch floor for 5 minutes before they start practice. And during that 5 minutes, they measure heart rate and heart rate variability, and it gives them an index compared to each athlete's own baseline. And that gives them sort of a red flag or a heads up that, okay, Ian's been working out a little bit hard. Looks like his heart rate variability index is way down today, so let's take it a little bit easier today. So kind of a screening method for larger teams. And then, of course, they can do more detailed stress and sleep analysis, for example, if need be. The idea is that the coach can get actionable insights from the physiological data of the athletes. But then today, the sector that I work with and what I'm going to focus on today is the Firstbeat Life method, and it is used by regular people. Maybe it's not the primary solution for elite athletes, but a lot of corporate athletes, a lot of people who are really into fitness, a lot of personal trainers and fitness coaches, for example, might use this with their clients. And the idea is that it's a individual health and wellness management tool, both for the individual client and the coach. So it's ideally utilized together with the coach and the client. And it provides information about stress and recovery, sleep, physical activity and exercise, so how the client is responding to their workouts, tracks subjective well-being as well. And in addition to that, it also provides different kind of red flags or indicators of overload, for example. And it can even send notifications both to the client and the coach if there is clear signs that this person is now showing some kind of signs of maybe extremely poor recovery or signs of extreme overload. And then maybe they need to see a doctor or really need to look more closely at the balance in their life. So these are sort of the features that Firstbeat Life has. And it's based on 24-hour modeling of the body's physiological state. And in just a couple of slides, I'll show what I mean with that. But we do base the method on accurate ECG-based data and then use that to talk about stress and recovery, for example. But before I show what I actually mean with the method itself, just a few general facts about heart rate variability. As you probably know, it means the beat-by-beat variation between heartbeats. So here you can see an ECG graph here. And by measuring the time between R waves, between consecutive heartbeats in milliseconds, there is a certain amount of variation between those millisecond values between heartbeats. A healthy heart does not beat like a metronome, but instead there is millisecond level variation that is an indication of a healthy, responsive heart. In general, it can be said that higher heart rate variability is associated with better physical and mental health, better cardiovascular fitness, better heart health. And autonomic nervous system is in the background of heart rate variability. It mediates how that works. And so in that way, what we do is we utilize heart rate variability to get a view into the sympathetic and parasympathetic parts of the nervous system. And that gives us a window into how the body is actually reacting and responding to different stress factors of life, whether it be stress caused by training too much or stress caused by working too hard, whatever the problem or the challenge is, the heart rate variability provides a window of how the person is responding to that. And I mentioned autonomic nervous system, so a few words about that as well. We have the two sides to that, the sympathetic, which is the fight or flight, sort of the gas pedal of the body that speeds up bodily functions. It's an absolutely normal part of life. We all need to be able to engage that system when we have to respond. Like right now, I'm sure my sympathetic nervous system is quite active because at 8 p.m. I have to be try to be sharp and try to make sure that I explain these topics clearly. So my heart rate is going to be elevated and my heart rate variability is probably going to be pretty low because I need to be on in this moment. Then the opposite side of the system is the parasympathetic part, which means calming down of body's functions, heart rate slowing down and heart rate variability increasing. And ideally, these two systems work in symbiosis, so meaning that when the sympathetic, the stressful situation is over, if the balance is good, we should be able to switch off, push the brake, and then our body starts slowing down and recovering. It becomes a problem when a person has too much stress, too much hard training, too much load in their lives. In a way, then a person can get stuck in the sympathetic side. Even if they lay down and go to sleep or they try to rest and recover, maybe try to take a nap, their heart keeps beating fast and nothing is sort of happening. They're not able to turn off that stress system. And that in the long term, of course, is a really big stress on the body and it's going to hurt performance in the long run for sure. The gold standard of measuring heart rate variability is ECG, meaning that electrically detecting a signal of, like I showed in the previous graph, we are measuring for example, measuring the R wave, from the ECG graph. And the accuracy of measuring that is 1 to 2 milliseconds, which very accurately detects every beat of the heart and the time between heartbeats. Compared to other technologies, for example, optical technology, like I'm wearing an optical device on my wrist, it also measures heart rate variability to some level of accuracy, but it's not the same, doesn't allow the same kind of, for example, 24/7 monitoring during motion, during rest, day and night, and also different body sizes and shapes and skin pigments. So this kind of ECG-based monitoring in general works on people of all sizes and shapes. This is a device that we use here at Firstbeat, and the reason we use that kind of a device is because we feel like we can really confidently draw conclusions from that. I'm not going to take any stand today on what's a good device and what's a bad device and what kind of things you should look for them. I think the main thing, like Ian mentioned in the beginning with wearables, is to learn whatever device you are using and try to understand as best as possible what it's measuring and what kind of conclusions you can make from that. And particularly if you're doing long-term tracking, like consumer wearables here on the left, they are designed for individual to use long-term, maybe every day of the week, all the time. So then you can learn your own baseline and trends and can gain a lot of good information from that. On the other end is medical products, for example, ambulatory ECG. Somebody might have had or heard of Holter monitoring, for example, that allows medical professionals to diagnose, for example, cardiac or heart-related conditions. Firstbeat Life, what I'm talking about today, is sort of between these two ends. So it's not a consumer wearable designed to be used every day by the individual. It's not a medical grade product, but it's what we would call a professional grade wearable that measures ECG very accurately and then draws conclusions from that, and is used together with some kind of a health or wellness professional and the client. The platform Firstbeat Life that I'll share some examples from, it consists of this measurement device and an app. So each client who is using Firstbeat Life, they have their own personal device for a period of time, typically for some months at least, and then they have an app where they can get measurement results from each time they put the device on. And then the coach or the professional who is working with the client, they have so-called admin tool that allows them to access each client's results. So if Ian is my client, for example, he's actually going to be doing a demo measurement here. He's going to be testing this for the next few months. So we'll probably have a call at some point to discuss his results and his findings, and I'll be able to access his result via the platform that I have here. So I can provide meaningful coaching even for a client who is, for example, across the ocean from me. And also group reporting is possible. So if you're working with a group of clients, you can do anonymized group summaries from your clients and their results. Before I show an example, a few more things, because I think I have an understanding that I probably have a lot of individuals online who are interested in sort of the details and the technology a little bit. So how we go from this heart rate variability to stress and recovery, it's a kind of a long process of algorithms and artifact correction and different kind of signal processing and decision trees to arrive at a personally calibrated state and digital model of each individual. And for that, we start with RR intervals and movement data, 3D acceleration movement data. These are the two values that the device that we use collect. In addition to that, we need the person's age and height and weight, gender and activity level sort of as a background variables. And then from that, our engine starts to segment that data into different coherent periods that are either physical activity, heart rate elevated, oxygen uptake elevated, movement happening, or recovery, which means that the parasympathetic activation is dominant, heart rate variability is high, heart rate is low. And then on the opposite side, sympathetic activity is dominating, heart rate is higher, heart rate variability is lower. And these are then shown in the report with these different colors that you can see here at the bottom of the screen. And this is maybe a more sort of detailed look at what a typical 24-hour reading from that kind of data would look like. So the red color that you see here, that's the sympathetic dominance. some kind of a stress reaction. I often call it activation level or energy, because it's not all bad. It's very, very normal. It belongs to life. It's an expected part of the course of the day when we do things. But then the recovery, or the green color that you see there, that means that the parasympathetic activity dominates and heart rate is slowing down. And the main point of this kind of coaching or this kind of analysis is to look at the big picture of the day. And as you can see here, we have some journal markings. So during the measurement, the client typically keeps a journal via their app, and then they can see how different activities and habits in their days, how it affects their ability to recover or not recover. Could have something to do with their work routines, or structuring their work day in a different way, structuring their exercise program in a different way, evening routines. Those are the kind of things that I'll show a few examples about. We'll calculate the balance between stress and recovery, the sleep score, and also physical activity score. The blue color means that. So this is the basis of any discussion between the coach and the client. And now I'll show a few examples of what those typical stressors, so when there is too much of this red color, too much stress reactions, and maybe hardly any of this recovery. So sometimes it's what I would call traditional stress. So having too much pressure, too many things to do at work, maybe too heavy of a workload. Sort of work stress is what usually comes to people's mind at first when we talk about stress. But very often it can be also something else. For example, a busy corporate athlete often thinks that they can skimp on sleep. I'm fine if I get 5 to 6 hours. But if you're training for a marathon and you're working a full-time job, you probably aren't going to be fine for a very long, at least not if you want to optimize your performance, if you're not sleeping enough. Same thing with nutrition. If you underestimate, you eat whatever comes to mind or what you happen to find in the refrigerator. But if you are training hard, having a lot of things going on in your life, obviously it's super important that the nutrition is healthy and balanced, enough calories, enough good quality calories. And that's clearly something that in this webinar series, I'm sure that you've talked about that quite a bit. Using alcohol to recover or relax. Many times it's said, maybe jokingly, that beer is a good recovery drink after a heavy workout, but physiologically, unfortunately, it really isn't a very good recovery drink. It tends to increase the sympathetic nervous system activation. And if you have a stressful life situation, a lot going on, alcohol is not a very, it's more of a stress factor than a recovery factor, even if it might sometimes seem like it helps us relax. When I train, I go all out. With this, I just mean that easily we think that the harder you train, the better it is. The faster you can improve your fitness when you really go out there and hammer those stairs and do your heat workouts and get your heart rate way up. And you might be following different kind of metrics, maybe your EPOC or your training effect or your percent of VO2 max. And it's easy to start thinking that the harder training is going to be better. But that also turns against itself. If we train too hard and too often, pretty soon the performance actually begins to suffer. And the next data example actually highlights that. That's something that very, very often our clients who do these measurements, they're often people who are very mindful of their fitness and their well-being, and they want to try to do right things. But when they see it in concrete data, it often sort of opens their eyes to that. This is an example of a situation where a high-intensity run is done late in the evening. So you can see it's from 8, a little bit before 8 to a little bit before 9 p.m. here, this blue segment, 1 hour. And it would be quite expected with most people, whether you are a normal person or an athlete, that's going to have an effect on your recovery the following night. I wouldn't say that this is not any kind of a problem, because sometimes it's the only time you might be able to go for that run. That's often when, for example, football matches or other kind of group sports might be taking place in the evening. But it is crucial that we understand that if we do high intensity training in the evening, the recovery is likely going to be less than optimal the following night. And then the next night's training, really, that's the key to the bigger development, is that are we then able to have an easier workout the next day? Like here, the same person has done an easy exercise here earlier in the evening, and their sleep recovery is excellent. You can see that pretty much the whole sleep period is nice and green. So they were able to get a very good recovery after that easier training. And of course, the weekly training program is a balance between these kind of different days so that you are able to optimize the number and intensity of the hard workouts and then still be able to recover from that. This is a very common example of what alcohol might do to recovery based on our data. And I'm sure people who've measured their recovery with Oura Ring or a Garmin or a Fitbit, they all have something similar in them. You probably noticed that the nights when you have a few beers or go out and share a bottle of wine with a friend or go out and solve the world's problems in a way and have a few drinks along the way, it probably is going to affect your recovery quite a bit. Quite a clear dose-response relationship that the more drinks you have, the bigger the effect is going to be. And even a very healthy, fit, young, sporty person can go from a completely green night to a completely red night if they, for example, have a bit heavier night of out drinking. And that's something that they have to take into consideration when they look at their week program. And certainly, if you know that you have to be on the top of your game the next day, then alcohol is not a great way to improve that recovery. This is a Finnish study. I'm sorry, some of the text here is in Finnish. I wasn't able to get that because it's not done by me. It's done by a nutritionist here in Finland, but I'll just shortly explain the point of this one. They were doing some studies on people's sleep rhythms, and by alternating the sleep rhythm, having a good rhythm of, eating rhythm, so having a regular breakfast, regular lunchtime, snacks when they need it. This is an example of a balanced eating day. They have some moments of recovery during the daytime here. As you can see, these little green bars during the day, the stress levels are quite low. The height of the red bars is not very high. And then in the evening, they're having good recovery and they get a very good recovery during sleep. The same person, this was actually the coach of the project, they had a day when they were just really, really busy, had lots going on, and they ended up skipping lunch, having a belated lunch 2 hours later, which was then a heavy pizza buffet, which is apparently not something that they do very often. And you can see that the stress levels, the red bars here, are a lot higher. They are not able to really switch off from that sympathetic fight or flight response to the recovery response. And even the following night is quite a bit more fragmented and not as good recovery. And I know that this is what nutrition coaches that work with clients, they really try to build this individually optimized eating rhythm to people's schedules, because that can have a powerful effect on both their energy levels during the day, but then also their ability to recover afterwards. Here's a couple of examples from a little bit smaller windows of not looking at the whole day, but here you can see the stress and recovery graph, and then the blue graph that's drawn on top of here. This is the heart rate variability in milliseconds, heart rate variability RMSSD graph. And it's just to highlight how certain kinds of, for example, mind-body activities can actually powerfully increase your heart rate variability acutely. People can learn to switch off from the fight or flight response to recovery by learning to do certain kind of breathing exercises or meditation or relaxation activities. This person did a deep breathing exercise here in the evening. You can see the heart rate variability clearly peaks quite a bit. Then they are reading before bedtime. The heart rate variability again quite a bit higher, especially when you compare this to their workday level. So by doing these kind of calming activities in the evening, they're able to boost their heart rate variability, which then stayed quite nice during the night. This is my own example from last year. Sometime I had a very big presentation at a seminar, and it was kind of a big event, and it was after the pandemic, and I hadn't really been out on a big stage in a while, and I was a bit nervous. And I thought before the talk that I'm gonna just test to see if I can backstage, if I can just sort of sit down for 5 minutes and breathe deeply and relax a little bit. And this is my heart rate variability graph in milliseconds, the black line here. So this is when I was doing my little bit of relaxation right before the presentation. Obviously, the variability then drops when I get on stage and start talking, but that's, I think, a powerful reminder that those kind of short segments of relaxation or activation of the of the nervous system, it really can help us switch off that stress response. And particularly for people having stressful lives, those kind of exercises are really, really beneficial. This is a different kind of example. I'll end my sort of example section with this one. This is also my own data from last year. I had COVID about a year ago, and let me get this out of the way here. And this was my day. I had my acute COVID days. I no longer had fever. So I wasn't feverish. I wasn't having an acute infection, but I was feeling horrible. I was completely exhausted. The COVID really took completely, emptied my battery. And it took me weeks to start feeling normal after that. Very, very tired and sort of pooped out and not having energy to do anything. But when you looked at my Firstbeat data from that day, it looks like I'm having a great day. I'm having super good recovery, lots and lots of green there throughout the day. And I think that just reminds us that no matter how useful data is, unless it's interpreted in the right context and understanding what's happening in the background, we cannot just say that, okay, this was a great day, looks like you're doing well, your performance is great. I was just lying down on the couch and not doing anything. So as a result, I wasn't kicking up a lot of stress responses, but clearly I wasn't feeling well at that. And these are the types of conversations that coaches often have with their clients. So when they see the data, they start analyzing and understanding what was happening on that day, what kinds of things was the client doing. Another note from this kind of data could be that there is absolutely no sign of blue there. You can see that this person has not moved at all. It was me. I wasn't moving because I was sick, so that's fine. But if this is a client's data, one of the first things the coach would probably start discussing with them is how to integrate some kind of physical activity into the day, because obviously that's good for their overall well-being as well. So data, whether it comes from a wearable device or any kind of device, it doesn't tell all. We have to always pair it with how the client is feeling and then understanding and making the right kind of conclusions from that. So a few words about supercompensation, probably a familiar phenomenon or a theory for some of you, maybe not for everyone, but basically all it means is the improvement in performance that occurs after exercise during the recovery period. So an athlete, in order to improve their performance, they have to train really hard. They have to push their comfort zones and really sort of disturb the homeostasis and go really hard sometimes. But then it's only during the recovery after that their performance actually improves. That's what the graph here is illustrating, that during exercise or right after exercise session, performance is going to be worse because, of course, muscles are tired and we need time to recover from that. But it's during sleep and during the easy recovery workouts afterwards that we are able to get to this same level and then actually supercompensate, meaning improve the performance to a higher level than before. In top level sports, this is the puzzle that coaches and athletes are constantly trying to find the right amounts of training, what the athlete can handle. How hard can they push themselves and still be able to recover? If it's even a little bit too hard, even an elite athlete might be really suffering with their training and their performance is not improving. So this is a very sort of fine equation and a fine balance to find in top level sports. When I talk about supercompensation of life, I would say that it's a lot more merciful for us normal people. We don't need to worry about centimeters or seconds, or we are not constantly living to win that gold medal or to improve some kind of performance by a couple more seconds or centimeters. Life is a little bit more flexible in that way. It's enough to do things right the most of the time to stay healthy and be able to perform well in life. So maybe it's not quite as difficult as it is in elite sports, but it still absolutely requires that we find some kind of a balance between what I call load of life and our recovery. And load of life means all the sports that you do. It means what you eat. It means your family demands, your job demands, your health situation, the different worries that we have about where the world is at today or your social circumstances. All those things cause some kind of load or stress for us. And that has to be in proportion with recovery. And sometimes it means that we need to ease off. So, for example, from your training, I think for athletes or corporate athletes or people who are really into their fitness, it's tough to admit sometimes that right now life's a little bit hard. I'm struggling to keep all the balls in the air. Perhaps I need to ease off from my training program a little bit. But oftentimes that might be the best thing you can do. For a couple of weeks, leave off those high intensity workouts and focus on your recovery, focus on keeping that balance in other aspects of your life better. And then when you feel like you are again starting to feel better, your performance starts to improve, then you can start boosting your intensity up again. And I think the difficult part about this is that's what this graph tries to illustrate too. It's some kind of a balance between all the things that you do and the amount of recovery that you get, is that there is no formula for that. It's individual for each person. So somebody needs a lot more easy workouts after their hard training than somebody else. It depends on your fitness level, your genetics, your life situation. So everyone has to kind of find this balance for themselves. And it takes a lot of trial and error. And surely we sometimes make mistakes, but that's where we need to develop those kind of what I sometimes call like sensors to start noticing that, okay, now something is not right. I'm doing too much and I need to slow down a little bit. I absolutely believe that data can help with that. I think it can help quite a lot, but we also need to listen to ourselves. And these are just some of the types of signs that a person who is maybe struggling with overtraining, is having overload, doing too much, performance starts to weaken. Suddenly you notice that you can no longer do your typical 5K run or whatever. It takes you longer, or your heart rate is much higher than it normally is during that time. Maybe you're having sleep problems, or you're constantly fatigued, lack of motivation, training doesn't sound fun anymore, starting to get injuries or getting sick all the time, maybe having a really big appetite or losing your appetite. All those are potential signs of some kind of overtraining. But then I think in addition to that, it can be very useful to have something that you are tracking, some kind of data. It might be morning heart rate. That's many people use that. They take their heart rate first thing in the morning, and they have a long time baseline from that, and they can start seeing signs in that. Might be morning heart rate variability. There is many different apps that track that, and that again, if you have a good baseline from yourself, can start telling you that now there is some kind of a change from my normal pattern, and perhaps I need to ease off from my training a little bit. In the Firstbeat data, oftentimes when you start, an athlete or regular person starts to seeing that their normally green nights are starting to have many hours of that red stress state, that can definitely be a warning sign or red flag that perhaps the balance is not right at that time. All right, I'm going to show a few findings from our big data then before we open the floor for some questions and discussion. So when I say big data, because we have done these kind of measurements that I've shown examples of, there has been hundreds of thousands of people over the last 20 years who have done these measurements, and we've been able to collect all that sort of raw data into a database, and then our analysts, they periodically go into that database and they pull different kind of population trends from that. One of the things that has been very sort of interesting and striking the last few years after we had the pandemic and we had the lockdown was how big the difference is when people are working remotely, when they are working in the office are. For example, consider activity. That's what the picture here on the left hand shows. It's looking at work days with less than 1,000 steps. And anybody who's ever tracked steps knows that less than 1,000 steps, it's not much. It means that you're just sort of moseying around the house a little bit, maybe going to get the mail or something like that. But it doesn't take a whole lot of activity to get 1,000 steps. And when we compare remote work days, the left bar here, to office work days, 20% of the remote work days are those less than 1,000 step days. So people have a lot more of those days when they're working from their home. Whereas when they go to the office, even those people who don't actually do exercise, just by commuting to the office, you have to walk somewhere to your car or to the parking garage or to the tube or to the bus. And again, maybe you walk over to lunch from your office. So simply just that act of going to the office tends to provide a lot more activity. And population health-wise, that's a significant finding because more and more people are now working remotely from their homes, and they have to find different ways of building that activity if they're only working from home. Having lunchtime walks or pre-work walks or some kind of little exercise breaks. The second graph here looks at the fitness level. We are also tracking the aerobic fitness with a 30-minute fitness level walk with Firstbeat measurements. And interestingly, we saw that throughout the pandemic and the lockdown, like in 2020 and 2021, the fitness level wasn't changing, the sort of the share of people in the lowest fitness category. So people in poor or very poor aerobic fitness. It stayed about the same. But then in 2022, it started to creep up quite significantly. You can see the percent of people in those lowest fitness categories. It's clearly getting higher here in the last year. And we are thinking that it's just some kind of a delayed response to people having more of those passive days and maybe haven't found their way back to the gyms and back to the exercise routines they had before the pandemic. And again, population level wise, if we have such big percentages of those people in very low fitness, it's going to start affecting different kind of health statistics as well. And then finally, the one on the right here, very clearly, I actually have two pictures of that because that's one of our most consistent findings that we have from data is that good fitness clearly seems to help with recovery. So people in better fitness here on the left-hand side, people on superior, excellent, good fitness, compared to the people in very poor fitness, they also have more recovery during the workday. So when we are looking at that green color that I showed before, the recovery during the workday, good fitness in a way protects you and gives you a better capacity to recovery during the day. So even if you are working, you are still able to sometimes switch off a little bit better. And this picture looks at 24-hour periods, but the same thing, different fitness categories from the lowest fitness to the highest fitness here on the right-hand side. It looks at minutes of recovery, minutes of that physiological recovery during the daytime. And clearly the people in better fitness have more. It looks at nighttime and also during the daytime. So again, the capacity to switch off the stress response and start recovering is better if your aerobic fitness is good. And maybe I'm preaching to the wrong crowd here because you guys are probably very sporty athletic population, but I also talk a lot to companies and corporations and different kind of employee groups. And it can be a bit motivational sometimes for people who just aren't taking care of their fitness to see that, yeah, maybe that's something I should try. Maybe that will allow me to also improve my recovery a little bit. But I think I'm going to end with this graph, and then Ian, we can take some questions or comments what you have there. This is just to kind of remind and highlight that whatever kind of approach we use to track our own well-being, whether it's data, whether it's purely listening to our subjective feelings, how we are feeling, how tired we feel, how well we sleep, the key would be to have that kind of a preventative approach where we start noticing these periods when we should have some kind of sensors that, okay, I'm not sleeping well, I'm feeling tired all the time, my stress levels are really high, my heart rate is higher than usual. And then we need to start taking some kind of preventative actions, sort of to turn the course instead of constantly run ourselves more and more stressed and the battery is getting emptier and emptier. And in the end, we end up having overtraining, maybe burnout, overload, some kind of physical or mental health problems if we just constantly keep pushing ourselves harder and not having enough recovery. When we start the preventative steps early enough by, for example, investing 30 more minutes for sleep or paying attention to our sleep routine, easing off our training a little bit, paying more attention to nutrition, whatever the strategy is, we can make some pretty fast and good gains and get to that optimal level of performance quite fast. Whereas if we only notice it when we are sick or when we are overtrained, then as many of you probably have experienced, it can be sort of a really long, tough road back to the normal level. It can take months or even years sometimes to really get back to the normal level. And I would say that whether you are listening to this as an individual or as a coach or professional who works with clients, this is sort of the key that we have to try to find those tipping points with people and see those early warning signs and then start doing something about that. But I think I'm going to end here, and Ian, let's see if there is any questions or any comments that people have about this.
All right, you ready for some questions?
Yes.
Can clients with a pacemaker use the device? Asks Liz.
Yes. Originally, we've said that we don't recommend that because pacemakers sort of affects the very thing that we are measuring. So especially if the pacing is regular, I wouldn't recommend that because then it sort of messes with the natural variability of the heart. So then either we cannot make sense of the data or it's not really meaningful data. But recently we've actually had quite a few people who have a pacemaker that only just gets triggered, for example, if the heart rate drops to a certain level, and it might only do it every few days, for example. So then we have said that if the client really wants to measure, and so there's no interaction between the measurement and the pacemaker, so they can do it, but there's always, when there is some kind of a heart irregularity or heart condition, we cannot guarantee how well it works with that, because if the natural variation is very different, so then there are some challenges with the analysis, but there's no harm in testing if you have the ability to test that.
So there's quite a lot of questioning around the colors on the graphs. So blue is when we're exercising, is that right?
Yes.
And is that picking it up from the accelerometer information as well?
Yeah, both heart rate and sort of the percent of VO2 max. We are constantly monitoring at what percent of the person's estimated VO2 max they are. So we are looking at the heart rate and VO2 max, but also the movement. So as an example would be if a person is doing, for example, yoga, where they are just sitting still, they are in the same position, they might be using their muscles quite a bit. It takes a lot of concentration, but there is no apparent movement if they are in place, and yoga is not designed to increase your heart rate. So a yoga session might not be detected as a blue bar in the journal. It might actually show up as stress reactions, and then we need to discuss that with the client so that they understand that, of course, yoga is very, very good for you. It's a great part of a training program, but it's difficult to identify it as exercise if there's no heart rate response and there's no movement. So those are sort of the two variables that help us differentiate between mentally stressful situations and physically stressful situations.
And then is it right that the green is representing a parasympathetic state and red is sympathetic?
Yes.
Liz was asking a question, is there an in-between state? So she was saying maybe we could have an orange for a balance between sympathetic and parasympathetic. So is there a transitory state there?
Yeah, I'm guessing you're using HeartMath maybe, because I know HeartMath has that kind of a state between. We don't really have that. There are time periods sometimes that if the analysis is not able to differentiate between stress and recovery, sometimes you might see some white segments there where we are not quite clear what's going on. But I would say that in the Firstbeat method, the green color will cover both positive and negative stress responses. So the red bar might come if you are having some kind of a very stressful negative meeting, or you are arguing with your children, or having a temper tantrum in the house. It might also come if you are watching your favorite team win a football match, or watching a theater that's very emotionally uplifting. So that can cause physiologically a very similar response. So it is key to keep in mind that the red, it's not only negative things, it's also those kind of very positive responses that still physiologically activate the nervous system.
So Geraldine is asking, can the system be used on individuals who are exposed to whole body vibration in off-road machines? She's doing some research in this area, but is concerned about interference.
I would guess that the heart rate signal itself, I don't see any problem with that. People have used the device and the method with all different kind of sports and activities. But if there is a lot of vibration, I'm speculating, but I'm guessing there could be some difficulty sometimes detecting those light physical activity versus stress states, because the vibration could seem like the person is moving even if they are not. I've seen that sometimes when a person has, for example, been driving a rally car in a very bumpy road very fast. So because the car is going up and down and there is a lot of vibration, it shows up as exercise, even if they are just sitting still. So I'm guessing there could be a little bit of difficulty with that physiological state detection, but the data quality itself, I don't see any problem with being able to detect the heart rate and heart rate variability.
Paul was asking about intermittent fasting and time-restricted feeding protocols and how that's likely to affect HRV.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on intermittent fasting or nutrition myself, but and nutrition field is complex because there are so many different ways of eating well and so many different nutrition strategies, and intermittent fasting works great for some people, and others might find that just really aggravates them, and as a result they might be sleeping a lot worse. Individually, I've seen cases where, and I've heard people say that when they do intermittent fasting, they are able to improve their recovery. So they're seeing more green during their sleep. They're seeing better heart rate variability responses. But I think it's one of those trial and error kind of things. You need to find out what works for you. That maybe there is other people who believe that is the right way to do it, but I think there's pros and cons against that, and the main thing would be to find out that if that's good for you and do some trial and error. Certainly, if you have a wearable device or are able to, for example, have a Firstbeat Life period for 3 months, it allows you to do those kind of testings and really just see differences and what are the kinds of activities that help you with recovery, and then what are the things that might hurt.
Okay, a question for Ishwara. How does overstraining during exercise affect HRV, and how does training during periodization affect HRV?
What was the first part?
How does overstraining during exercise?
Like going really hard?
Well,
I would say that athletes definitely, when they are having a really hard training period, when their training periods are probably going to have some kind of a cycle of 1 week of really hard training, maybe 2 weeks of really hard training, and then easier training. They would expect to be seeing some lowering of heart rate variability and maybe higher heart rates during the really hard periods. And the key for them really is to make sure that they don't do it for too long, and that they are able to then start recovering when they ease off on the training. So when you are an athlete who is training really hard, if you really want to reach that supercompensation and you want to find the next level of performance, you do sometimes have to sort of dig yourself into the pit a little bit, and your performance will temporarily suffer, but it can't go on for too long. So clearly, in that kind of very demanding training programs, tracking the recovery is important, so that you start seeing when the training eases off, for example, well ahead of a competition or something like that, then you would expect to see the values improving again.
Thank you. Thomas asks, how is HRV related to rate of perceived exertion, or RPE?
Well, in general, heart rate variability, because it reflects the sympathetic or the parasympathetic dominance, and when we exercise, we are all on the sympathetic side of the nervous system. The harder we exercise, the more sympathetic, more stressful it is, and that means your heart rate is getting higher and higher, and heart rate variability is, during that kind of hard training, heart rate variability is going to be pretty much zero or non-existent. So during training itself, I would say that heart rate variability provides limited value, because it's normal that it's very low. Then it's during the period after your training that you can really utilize that to monitor the hours or the days after the hard training, and then make sure that how quickly it begins to recover. And for example, interval training or something like that, the athletes often monitor the time after their training to make sure that they are starting to get that recovery quite quickly after that.
So Paul's asking, is there any correlative information between HRV data and other metrics such as blood work?
There are definite correlations, for example, between heart rate variability and cortisol. Lots of studies I'm sure that you can find about that. Blood work, I'm trying to think if there is any like direct correlations. I mean, clearly, if your overall health status is worse, so for example, your hemoglobin is dropping, that's going to start causing stress responses to the body, and it might show up as a lower heart rate variability. So sort of it's a good reflection of the overall health status in general, but I don't have any exact numbers or correlates between specific blood values and heart rate variability.
And Paula also asks, does HRV drop with age? Quote,
yes.
Asking for a friend.
I'm answering for a friend. Yes, it drops significantly. So like if we are, for example, monitoring the average heart rate variability during the sleep period, that's one of the values that our method monitors. It looks at the whole sleep period and gives an average from that. People in the 20s, a good value for them might be, for example, 55 milliseconds, whereas people in the 50s, a good value might be 25 milliseconds. So it does sort of systematically drop with age. Of course, fitness plays a role too. So in general, people in good fitness have a higher heart rate variability. People in low fitness have a lower heart rate variability. But with age, there is going to be a trend of it dropping. And for example, in our results, we've calculated that age factor into. So when you get your own value and you're put into a good or a moderate or low category, so it already has calculated your age group into that, so that a 50-year-old is not going to be compared against 20-year-olds. And also, that means that's a really good question. I didn't even remember to mention it earlier. Also, genetics does play a big role. Maybe we can end with that. That genetics plays somewhere around 30% of what your genetic heart rate variability level is. And I think that's super important to remember if you start tracking heart rate variability with anything, to learn what your own baseline is. Your friend or your spouse or your colleague might say that, yeah, mine's like 76 milliseconds, and then you see yours at 32, and you might feel really like, you know, what's going on? I'm fitter than you are, and everything is well in my life, and how come it's so low? But the genetics does play a big role, and obviously we cannot change our genetics, but we can work with our individual level where we are at and learn by tracking that.
Okay, so that's a really good place to finish, I think, Tiina. And I think with any tracking device, we need to build up our own patterns. So Paul, who asks these challenging questions, he does a lot of blood work. Yeah. And when he lectures, he'll point out that, hey, we need a pattern for the client. We need their individual data. So the same with HRV and building that pattern over time, and then we understand when they're stepping out of their normal. Yeah, I would say that that's sort of at the heart of my message when I talk about Firstbeat Life data too, that there is no such thing as what's the perfect 24-hour period or what kind of data you should expect to have, but it's really more the learning tool and a conversation starter between the coach and the client when you start seeing how that individual client is responding to different things. But it's not really a competition so much, because we are all individuals and we respond to life's demands in different ways. So wonderful. Thank you very much. And I really appreciate you staying up late. So going to have a nice chill before bed. Yeah, I better go do some deep breathing or relaxation now so I can bring my nervous system down before I go to bed. Excellent. Thank you, Tiina. And thanks to everyone that's joined us this evening.